Every family has its demons, and on this episode, we are going to be talking about the new horror movie, Evil Dead Burn. So break out that Necronomicon as Cine James Movie Talk starts now. What's up, everybody, and welcome to Cine James Movie Talk. I am your host, Mr. Cine James himself, and today I am going to be doing a spoiler discussion on the new horror movie, Evil Dead Burn. But before we get into that, as always, you know what to do. If you like the show, you like the content, you're listening to me on YouTube and Spotify, hit that like, hit that subscribe, show me some love, and as always, I greatly appreciate all of your support. Before we get into my discussion on Evil Dead Burn, as always, let's run through a little bit of the stats on this movie. So, Evil Dead Burn was released on July 10th, just last week. This movie is directed by, I don't know if I'm going to get the name correct, but this movie is directed by Sebastian Vanasek. And this movie was produced by Sam Raimi, Ramel Adam, Lee Cronin, Rob Tapert, and Bruce Campbell. This movie had a budget of $20 million with a current box office of around $40 million. Rotten Tomatoes critic score has it at 71% with an audience score of 80%. When we talk about the producers of this movie, of course, we know Sam Raimi from the original Evil Dead series, from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man series, which, by the way, if you go to my other show that I co-host alongside The Big Rob Theory, we just finished our episode on the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi Spider-Man series leading up to the new Spider-Man movie coming out, brand new day, so you're not going to want to miss that episode. But we have Sam Raimi producing this. We have Ramel Adam, we have Lee Cronin from the previous Evil Dead Rise, and from a movie that he just released earlier this year, The Mummy. We have Rob Tapert from Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness. He also did one of my favorite movies, Darkman. He did the Jean-Claude Van Damme classic, Time Cop. He's been involved in the current Evil Dead series, The Grudge, 30 Days of Night. So he has a very solid resume in the movie business. And then, of course, we have rounding out the production team, we have the one and only Mr. Ash himself, Bruce Campbell. So a very solid production crew behind the scenes on this. Before we get into the movie, let's just do a quick little chat about the Evil Dead series. This is the third installment, the sixth movie in the total Evil Dead franchise. But in 2013, they kind of did I don't know if I want to say a reboot, but a continuation, kind of a new look to Evil Dead. They launched Evil Dead in 2013, followed by Evil Dead Rise in 2023, and then, of course, the new one that was just released, Evil Dead Burn. But let's go back a little bit to the original series. So the original series started off with the Evil Dead in 1981, and then we had Evil Dead 2 in 1987, followed by Army of Darkness in 1992. So as a kid growing up, I was a very big horror movie fan, and I was very fortunate to grow up in the generation that had, you want to call it the golden era of horror movies with, of course, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th, the Hellraiser series. And then, of course, you can throw in the Evil Dead series. As a kid, though, I was not really into the Evil Dead. I'd seen it on TV. I knew what it was. I understood the references. I mean, as kids, if we're out playing and we pretend like we have a shotgun or something, we'd always call it our boomstick, of course, from Army of Darkness. And then, of course, for those that remember, in the game Duke Nukem, when he would talk at times, he would mention his weapon as his boomstick. So I understood the pop culture references. I understood all that. I knew who Ash was. But I wasn't big into it. I would watch it as a passes by. My main stables when it came to the horror movies of that time, of course, was, like I just mentioned, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween. The first one that I actually seen in this series was Army of Darkness. And again, going back to that time, I probably checked this out on either the Sci-Fi Channel, Joe Bob Briggs, TNT's Monster Vision, perhaps maybe on USA's Up All Night, because that's where you would see a lot of the horror movies at the time. So I did catch Army of Darkness first, caught that on TV, and then, like I did with other horror movie installments, I would watch one of the movies in the series and then want to go back and check out the other ones. So after I'd seen Army of Darkness, I went back and seen, of course, Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. The movie out of the series that I am the most familiar with is, of course, Evil Dead 2. And so when you go back and watch the original movies, just to give you a short rundown, they follow Bruce Campbell's character Ash. And the first movie is kind of it almost, when you compare the three of them, it's almost a standalone, because when we get to Evil Dead 2, which the first one is really, first one is awesome. Okay. It's a classic and iconic film. But I think the second one's kind of in an interesting place, because it's connected to, of course, the following movie, Army of Darkness. But the second one is kind of what you would call a requel. It's like a reboot and a sequel. And it basically, Evil Dead 2, basically retells the events, but in a different way from the first movie. And then at the end of it, it leads into Ash going back into the 1300s, into the medieval times, to take on an Army of Darkness. He takes on the dead back in the medieval times, and he has to retrieve the Necronomicon to get his way back home. So that's kind of a quick little rundown of the original series. And then, of course, we get into the newer series, and now to Evil Dead Burn. Before I go through this is going to be a spoiler review discussion. So if you have not seen this movie yet, pause this, go check out the movie, and then come back and give this a view. But again, this is going to be a spoiler discussion. My quick overall thoughts to this movie is it's a fun, gruesome, gory style horror movie. The story, it does try to have a story, and the story is actually not that bad. And there are some callbacks, there are some continuities to the previous installments, as well as callbacks to the original Evil Dead series. So the one thing I will say, as you guys know when I've talked about previous movies, is I am a fan of continuity in sequels. Be it good or bad, I am a fan when the movies continue and carry on, and they acknowledge what's come before, and they try to keep everything into a continuity story. Again, be it good or bad. And this movie does that. And so I think that, do I think it's the best Evil Dead in the series? No. I still think if you take all of the movies as a whole, the best one to me is still Evil Dead 2. And I think a lot of that is just because of the time, place it was in. It's of course, it's an iconic nostalgia movie, and it has that mix of horror, but over the top kind of camp and humor with it. And I think it just, to me, and again, this may be because of my era, my childhood speaking on this, but I just think that Evil Dead 2 is the best one out of the series. Now, as far as the three in this, the newer ones between Evil Dead Rise, and Evil Dead Burn, I would place this, for me, it's tough. I think the best one out of the three is Evil Dead Rise. I would maybe put you could swap out the second place between Evil Dead and Evil Dead Burn, but I think that Evil Dead Rise is the better one out of the three of these. But this one is it's a fun installment into the series, and again, it does connect that continuity, which I do like. Do I think this is something you should run to theaters to see? No, I think this is something that is definitely worth watching on streaming when it gets to Halloween time is right around the corner, and I think this is definitely a movie you would watch during spooky season. But is this a movie that you need to rush to theaters to go see? No, but it is if you want to have like a fun date night, or you just want to go see something fun in theaters, go check this out. So let's get into the rundown of this movie. So this movie opens up with we're at the lake house, and we see Joseph as he's listening to an audio recording of his grandfather, Benjamin Price, talking about the Necronomicon and the Kandarian dagger. And like I said, his grandson is listening to this while trying to look. He finds the dagger, and as he's finding the dagger, you hear his grandfather say in the recording, he basically says, you don't want to unseal this thing, because if you unseal this thing, the dead are going to come, that they're going to sense it, and they're going to come looking for it. Because you find out that this dagger, they want this dagger, essentially, if I'm correct, to destroy this, because this dagger is the one thing that can defeat the Deadites. So anyways, Joseph, not heeding any of the words from his grandfather, he unseals the dagger, and then we cut to the lake, where we see two fishermen, in which one of them goes away and leaves the other fisherman there on the dock. And then this is where we see Jessica come back as a Deadite. And if you don't remember, Jessica and her sister Teresa were at the beginning of Evil Dead Rise, where they quickly go to them being on the lake, and you see Jessica as a Deadite, and she scalps the head of her sister. And then as the fisherman's fishing, he pulls up the skull of her sister, and you can identify that because you can see the scalp piece, and that is Teresa from the beginning of Evil Dead Rise. So then, as we see coming up from the water, as his buddy goes out to the water to find his friend, we see Jessica rise from the waters, and this is where we're off to a gruesome start, because as he pulls his friend out of the water, you see that it is only half of his friend, the top half. And again, this is just like the previous installments of the Evil Dead series. This is a very gruesome and gore movie, and this movie does not miss the mark on it. We are off and running with the gore right out of the gate. We then cut to a nightclub, the nightclub that is owned by Joseph's brother, William. And we see William with his wife, Alice, and we see Joseph with his girlfriend, Thea, as they are celebrating Joseph's birthday. And as they are celebrating the birthday, William and Alice get into a fight, which causes an intoxicated William to drive away. While driving, he crashes into Jessica, and then while he is burning in the car, we see Jessica laying there, and she recites the passage from the Necronomicon and passes the possession to Will. We then go to Alice, Joseph, and Thea with the family as they are together at Will's cremation service. And then when you're in the scene here, you can see some of the tension between Alice and Will's family, most notably the dad, Edgar. After the service, and I think this was kind of and one thing that the Evil Dead series does is they find a way to interject the gruesome and interject the scare scenes and the horror, and they have these elements of camp and comedy along with it. And this is kind of one of those scenes because they're having the service while construction's going on outside, and they were assured that the construction company was going to stop. But while the service is going and they're trying to have their moments, you can hear the construction company loud outside, and it's a fun little distraction in it. Now these newer movies, they're not as campy, I would say, as the original Evil Dead series, because again, the original Evil Dead series from the 80s and the early 90s, they have that 80s, early 90s campy look and charm to them. And whereas the newer ones, they have that, but it doesn't have the same feel as the original ones. But anyway, we go to, after the service, Will is being taken into the back room area to be cremated, just as Edgar comes in and he wants to have one more moment privately with his son. And this is where William breaks out of the coffin, puts a little burn on his father, and he kills the cremator. And this is where you can see the early signs of Edgar becoming possessed. You see it. You see those early signs right here at this. And I will say this, out of all of the possessed Deadites in this movie, I think the best one is the father. I think Edgar plays it. Honorable mention, a huge mention though to Thea. I like the Deadite Thea in this when we get to that, but I think that Edgar really stands out in this, and I really enjoyed watching his performance. So we then go to now to everyone being at the family lake house, okay, and we see. This is where we saw the grandmother at the service, but this is where we really get to see the grandmother and realizing that her condition, that she has dementia. And I think that these stand out as much as I like Edgar as the Deadite, and I like the character in this and how it looks and how he looks. I think the funnest character in this, and I think the character that really makes this to me is the grandmother. It had a mix of both. You had like some mixed emotions with her. You feel sad for her because she has the dementia, and then she's terrifying in this, and then she also has some funny elements to this movie. So we go back to the lake house, and again, mentioned we see more where the grandma has dementia, and then we have the scene where Joseph and his mom Susan, they're up in the attic and they're arguing about. She finds out that Joseph, because he is gifted a pen from William earlier, before William's death. They're at the nightclub. William gives him a pen. Come to find out, he's writing a book, and we find out that he is actually writing a book on his grandfather and about his grandfather and his quest and his stuff with the Book of the Dead and the Circle of the Wise Men. And so they have their back and forth with that. And they argue about his obsession with the book and being a part of the Circle of the Wise Men. And then we also learn that the Circle of the Wise Men was a group that fought against the Deadites. And this is where we get the connectivity to the original Evil Dead series, where we find out that Joseph's grandfather was in the circle along with Professor, if I say the last name right, Professor Nobi from the original Evil Dead series. He is the one that discovers the Necronomicon. And if you remember from the original Evil Dead series, when they're playing the reel-to-reel, they're playing the audio tapes, that is Professor Nobi on those audio tapes. We go to the scene where they're around the dinner table, and this is where things really start to pick up, and we are off and running in this movie. We have the tensions around the table as we start to see the possession within Edgar start to grow more and more. And this is where you kind of you see a little bit where they blame Alice for William's death. And then they're going back and forth about what's going to happen, what Alice should do with the nightclub. And this is where Edgar finally just possession takes over, starts to really take over him, and he stabs the dog Max, and he's brutally stabs him and kills him. And then he hits Joseph with the wine bottle. And then we have Joseph and Thea, they're rushing Edgar to the hospital. But now, while he's in the back of the SUV, he has now become a full Deadite, and he brutally attacks and kills Thea. Again, this is a very gruesome movie, and we see him pull the car door. The car door gets slammed on Thea's fingers, resulting in her losing him. And then Joseph pulls his gun on his dad, but he can't pull the trigger. And this is where Thea hits Edgar with she hits Edgar in the face with looks like a fire extinguisher. And but then Edgar, he is just too much. And as this is happening, he continues to brutally attack Thea. And as Joseph, which is this was an interesting thing they did with Joseph, because you would think it's his girlfriend, and they set this up. I think they set this up good for when Thea comes back. He takes a coward's way. He leaves his girlfriend in there. He escapes out of the sunroof while she is getting brutally attacked, and this results in Edgar. He takes the headrest of the car seat. He pulls it out and he stabs the metal parts. He stabs the metal spike parts into Thea's mouth, ending Thea. We then cut back. Will runs off, and this is where we see Susan and Alice back at the lake house. Susan's burying Max, and then she comes back into the house. She's standing there with Susan as Joseph if I've said Will, I apologize. Will is the brother that was killed, who that was the beginning of it. Joseph is the brother. So if I mix it up, I do apologize. So then we get back to the house. There's Susan, and after Alice has come back in from burying Max, Joseph comes running in and he slams the door. And then again, this is where we're continuing to pick things up because a knock on the door. We get a knock on the door. And then we see, well, actually, I'll take it back. We're going to go back. After she buries Max, after Alice buries Max, she finds the Necronomicon and she's reading through it and she starts to speak the words and she learns about the dagger and the circle of the wise men. But as she speaks the words, we get that classic POV shot, which is supposed to be a POV of the demonic presence going through the trees and everything. That's a classic in the Evil Dead series. And then this is also where we get, as the POV view is coming through, we get Max, after she just buried Max. Max bursts through and he attacks Alice. And then we go back to the house where Alice is standing there. And after all this has happened, and then Joseph bursts through the door. And then we hear a knock on the door and we hear the voice of Thea outside the door. Kind of a creepy moment. And then Alice opens the door and we see Thea walk in. She is now a deadite and she has the car seat still through her. And this is I think this is a really very creepy and really cool visual scene because she takes the car seat and she pushes it out of her mouth. And then she goes over and she drinks the hot candle wax and she has a cheer like to your perfect family. And then she starts to attack everyone as they push her down the basement and shut the door. Then again, things are really picking up here because then they run outside and I think this again visually, and this is such a gruesome scene. They run outside to see Edgar and he whistles for Max to come over. And this is where he shoots himself in the head multiple times. And it's a very gruesome, but this whole scene and this setup, it visually, I think it looks really cool. We go back into the house where the grandmother is being attacked by Thea. She gets attacked by Thea. And as she attacks Alice as well. And then Susan, and she attacks Susan, Joseph, and all them. And she's demanding to know where the dagger is. This is where... So we go. I'm sorry, she hasn't attacked the grandmother yet. I apologize. This is where they are, as they're getting attacked by Thea and everything. They are strapping. This is a kind of a funny scene. They're strapping the grandmother to her chair that, like, you've seen these in homes before, where the chair goes up the electric railing. And as they attack and as the fight's going on, we cut to the grandma slowly going up, and she's saying, like, "I told you she was a thief," and all that stuff. Again. What the Evil Dead series does do well is it has its ways to incorporate the gore and the gruesomeness and the horror elements while injecting the comedy to it. But they don't inject the comedy where it's really overbearing or there's a lot of it. They just have those, like, especially in this movie, they have those subtle hints and those subtle things to it that you can have your laughs here and there. And this is a good scene. This is also where we got this in the trailer. We saw like glimpses of this in the trailer. This is where we get the scene where Joseph, they're in the kitchen and he's being chased down by Thea, and he stumbles back onto the forks and knives from the door that was left open on the dishwasher. And this is where Thea, she gets on top of him and she pushes him down on it. And again, as she's doing this, and you kind of, even though she is evilly possessed, you kind of understand what she's saying here, because she's saying, you're so quick to kill me, but you wouldn't kill your own father who was killing me. So you kind of sit back and like, man, that's kind of valid. She's got some points there. And so then this is where Thea, after this is where she goes after the grandma for information, because she thinks, even with the dementia that the grandma has, she thinks that the grandmother knows where her husband put the dagger. And this is where we get Joseph, as she's going through this with the grandmother. This is where we get Joseph coming back, and this is a very brutal scene. He has the door to the dishwasher, and he is just smashing Thea's face to where there is pretty much nothing left. It's gruesome. Again, the Evil Dead movies, they're there with the Terrifier movies as far as level of gore, violence, and gruesomeness. So that's the thing about we're going to get back to our plot in a minute, but that's the thing about these movies, right? Is you can go into these looking at the story, but let's be honest about this. As horror movie fans, a lot of times with these, especially with these Evil Dead movies, maybe, we're not necessarily going into these looking for compelling stories. We're going to these, like the Terrifier movies, we're going to these to see the level of gore. We're going to these to see how gruesome can they make these, how creative can they get with some of the kills, and how creative can they get with the gruesomeness to the Deadites. That's kind of a lot of what we're here for with these. And this scene where he is smashing her face with the dishwasher door is no exception. After this is where we do get a slowdown in the movie, and this is where Joseph and Alice, we're getting some exposition here where he's telling Alice about his grandfather, and he's kind of laying out there what the Circle of the Wise Men is, and he's going through and he's explaining things to her. So this is kind of like it's a breather part in the movie. We're kind of slowing down. And then we get what I think is the creepiest. I think this is the creepiest scene in this whole movie. But it's so nicely done. This whole scene is very well done. We get the scene now. This is where Susan is with her mom, and she's got her laying in the bed, and we're trying to calm things down here. And Susan's mom goes under the sheets, and this is where Susan walks away, and we get that creepy shot of the grandma rising up with the sheets still covering her. And then all of a sudden, she calls Susan by her name. And this draws attention to Susan because her grandmother has dementia. And this is where she kind of knows something's not right. And then all of a sudden, the grandmother just shoots straight up. It's a very creepy and well done scene. And this is where the grandmother, she's talking now to Susan, and she's extending her arms out, and she's telling her that we can all be a family again. That's what you want, and all this stuff. And then as she's talking to her and she's embracing her grandmother, she pulls the sheets down to reveal what we had suspected, that the grandmother is now possessed and is now a Deadite. Susan then goes to the window to see Edgar there. As she opens the window to let him in, they kiss, and this is now where Susan has now become possessed. And I think this to kind of a thing too, and I talked about this a minute ago, this is again furthering where I think, to me, the grandmother, as I like the Deadite Edgar, I like the father in this, but the grandmother in this, to me, and I like Thea in this as well, but the grandmother in this, I think, is the total package in this movie when you combine the horror elements and the comedy. I think she is just absolutely, she makes this movie. She makes this movie to me. So then Susan comes down. She comes downstairs and she's telling Joseph to give the Deadites what they want. And then she asks where the dagger is. As Edgar attacks Joseph and Alice, Edgar takes Joseph and buries his face. This is a really disgusting scene. He takes Joseph's face and he buries it into Thea's destroyed face. And then Joseph makes one final attack to stop Edgar, but he is brutally attacked, and for the most part, he's dead. He's gone. Alice then goes on the look for the dagger as she is attacked by the grandmother. This is another creepy kind of scene because she's standing there. You can see the grandmother in the back, and it's kind of that blurred. Those are always creepy in horror movies when you have the blurred image and you know what's coming. But the grandmother attacks Alice, and this is where we get a very very cringy scene where she takes the pen. She takes a pen, one of them old style pens with the sharp end, and she jams it into the eardrum of Alice. It's it was tough for me to watch even. Oh man, it is a very tough scene. But then Alice comes back and she straps the grandma's leg to the electric chair and it sends her down the stairs. And then as Alice is coming to, and this is kind of where you start to see Alice a little bit, it's almost kind of what has happened in some of the other Evil Dead movies, especially like in the original series, where your main character person that's fighting through all of this finally starts to, I don't know if you want to say, becomes accepting of what's going on around them, and really starts to just become as crazy as the settings around them. And they start to lose a little bit of that fear of what's going on around them. And now they're ready to fight, and their whole demeanor changes. Their attitude changes with a lot of this. And instead of being the fearful person and always running, now they're ready to take the fight to the demonic presence. But she looks down. Alice looks down the stairs, and she sees Grandma trying to slice her leg off to get out of the strap as Edgar chases Alice up the stairs. And then this gets Alice takes Susan, and they go into the bathroom. She locks the door. She constrains Susan to the heater, and then they start having. This is where you find out. This is also where we're again another scene where Alice is pulling the remaining parts of the pin out of her ear, and this is where Susan again. We find out this is where we seen some of the flashback stuff earlier, but this is where Alice tells Susan, "Hey, your son, and you knew what your son was. He was abusive to me, the way he treated me." And we see those flashback sequences, and this is where she kind of has it out with Susan, and she's like, "You knew about this the whole time." And as this is going on, this is where Susan now has had a complete transformation into being a Deadite. And this is where Alice and Susan fight, and Alice escapes she has that weed whacker, and she uses that to cut a hole to go up into the attic, and she makes her way up into the attic to find the dagger. But this is where she hears the voice of Joseph, and Joseph is coming up now, and now he is possessed. He is now a Deadite, and he attacks her. She has all these different knives, daggers, and all these things with her, and she stabs Joseph with different ones, and he tells her that's the wrong one. And then she finds the right one, not knowing she does. She's just grabbing random ones. And then she finally gets the right dagger and stabs Joseph with it, ending him as a Deadite. And then we see the remaining Deadites. So we have Edgar, Susan, and stuff like they're chasing Alice as she eliminates Susan and Edgar with the weed whacker. Again, that's where they were in the chimney there and going back down. And she takes the weed whacker and she just massacres both of them. And then she sets the house on fire. And as she's going out, she kills Max with the dagger as he jumps towards her. As she's laying outside, we get that overhead view, and then it turns. You can hear Will talking to her. William has finally arrived to the house, and he is standing there. This is an awesome shot, I think. The house is in flames, and you just see the silhouette. You see William standing there, and then you see William walking to her, and you finally get the full presence. I think the way William looks as a Deadite, I think is absolutely awesome. And I think as far as a Deadite goes, it's the best look of a Deadite. So then this is where the chase is on. Will chases and attacks Alice. They go back to the construction site area, and this results in Alice destroying William with a chainsaw. Again, a nice little callback to the original Evil Dead series, because as we all know, the weapon of choice for Ash that he used as his hand when he had to replace his hand in the Evil Dead 2 movie and going into Army of Darkness was the chainsaw. That is an iconic weapon in the Evil Dead series, and of course an iconic weapon for Ash. So she ends up destroying him with the chainsaw and stabbing him with the dagger. Same thing, ending William as a Deadite. We get the final close-up shot as authorities and everyone arrives. We get the final close-up shot as Alice, as we see the red in her eye from the damaged eye from earlier. And they kind of, it's kind of left, you don't know, because of all the fighting and all the blood and all those different things. Did she end up possibly being possessed? We don't know. We don't know. And they kind of leave it at that. We then get a mid-credit and a post-credit scene. So the mid-credit scene, and this is absolutely hilarious. The mid-credit scene is the grandma's crawling on the road, and then a Jeep stops to offer assistance. The lady gets out, and the grandma is talking in her normal voice, and then all of a sudden she turns it on into Deadite mode and she attacks the driver. And then we get the post-credits scene, which was popular with a lot of people and the fans of the Evil Dead series. It was kind of a highlight of this movie. And again, as we talk about, as I'm a fan of continuity and connecting pieces together, this end credit scene does just that. So we go to a crematory where there's a little girl in there, and she's seeing all the different names on the urns, and she sees the name of Ellie, which, if you don't know, Ellie was the mom in the main Deadite and the mom in Evil Dead Rise. So then we see the kid reading off the urns, as I said, and then she sees the name Ellie. The kid looks in the mirror, and she sees the normal Ellie there. And then as she pans away from the mirror and turns around, she sees Ellie in the demonic Deadite form. And this was and Ellie ends up killing the kid, snaps the kid's neck. And for this movie, that was kind of okay, we're going there. They didn't pull any punches with this scene. And then after she does that, then you hear Ellie saying, "Mommy is back." And that is the end of Evil Dead Burn. Like I said, overall with this movie, it hits you in all the spots as a horror movie person. If you're going into this and you're wanting all of the things you've come to know with Evil Dead when it comes to the gore, the violence, the gruesomeness, and the elements of kind of some of the camp and a little bit of the comedic elements in with this, you're gonna get just that. I think the story is okay. I like the family element that they did bring in with this, and again, I do like how they try to connect the pieces to the previous installments. But don't go into this thinking you're getting some hardcore, really good storytelling with this. This is a gruesome, bash 'em up horror movie. Like I said, again, if you're looking for something fun to go see in theaters, go check this out. But I really think this is something that you don't need to rush to go see in theaters, but this is going to be a fun movie to watch as we get closer and we get into spooky season, we get into Halloween. What I am looking forward to, and we've already made this known, I believe it's going to be out in 2028. I believe that's when it's coming out, but they are already talking about the next installment, which this is going to be rather interesting. The next installment is going to be called Evil Dead Wrath. I believe that's what it's going to be called. And this one is going to be, from what I have read and understand, is going to be a prequel that's going to be set in the 70s. Before the events of the original Evil Dead movie from 1981. That's going to be really interesting to see what they do with that. So you would have to kind of think, when you're talking about going back to that time, are they going to do it where they're really going to go into Professor Nobi and him discovering the Necronomicon and creating those audio tapes that we listened to in the original series and have kind of been iconic through the series? Are we going to get that, and then having him at that famous cabin that we see at the beginning, that we see that is iconic again in the Evil Dead series? It's going to be really interesting to see what they do, and then it's also going to be interesting to see where they go after that, because they've already, as this post-credit scene, they've already shown that Ellie from Evil Dead Rise, she's still there. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go next. But that is going to do it for this episode on Evil Dead Burn. I want to know your thoughts on the movie. Let me know what you think about this. Leave me a comment in the comments section. I want to know your thoughts on Evil Dead Burn. But again, that is going to do it for this episode. My lineup coming up, I am going to is right around the corner. I am looking forward to this. We are going to be talking about what's coming up, the next stop in the MCU, Spider-Man Brand New Day. I can't wait to go see that, and I can't wait to come back and share my thoughts with you. So that's going to be an episode coming up. I'm not really sure. I am not 100% yet. I may or may not do a discussion on the Odyssey. I'm not sure yet. And I don't know what my next episode, if that's going to be the Odyssey or what's going to be in between now and Spider-Man. But I will deliver the goods on something. As far as my other show goes, Super Cinema Bros that I co-host alongside with the Big Rob Theory. We just finished Our first episode on the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, that'll be releasing very, very soon. And then our next episode on the road to Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to be on the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie. So you're not going to want to miss that. Once again, that is my other show, Super Cinema Bros, that I co-host alongside with the Big Rob Theory. Once again, guys, if you like this show, you like the content, you're listening to me on YouTube and Spotify, hit that like, hit that subscribe. Follow me on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Cine James Movie Talk. And once again, that is going to do it for this episode. I greatly appreciate everyone tuning in. And until next time, I'll see you at the box office.